Hi, my name is Beth Massey and welcome to the WPF Forms Over Data video series. Today I'm going to show you how to set up binding to a list of lookup values using a combo box with Windows Presentation Foundation, also known as WPF. So I've got Visual Studio open and I'm going to create a new WPF application. So File, New Project, and select WPF application, and we'll call this WPF Lookup. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use this OMS database that we created in the very first Forms Over Data video series. It just contains a simple set of tables: customer, orders, order detail, and products. So what I want to do is just create a form that works with the order, which has a customer foreign key. But instead of displaying the customer ID, which has no meaning to the user, we want to display the customer names in a combo box. Keep in mind that our set of customer records in this example is small, so this UI metaphor of displaying customers in a combo box works well. However, if you had thousands of customers to choose from, you'd be much better off creating a search form instead. Okay, so let's get started here. First, let's create a new data source. So I'm going to go to Data, Add New Data Source, and I'm going to select Database, and we're going to go ahead and create a new connection to our OMS database, and I'm going to select the Orders table. This will be the table that we want to edit. And I'll just name this Order Dataset. Okay, so what that did is that just added the order data set into our Visual Studio project right here. Now we need to create the lookup data set. So this is going to be the list of values that we display in the combo box. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Data, Add New Data Source again. This time though, I'm going to select the customer. But all I want to do is select the customer ID, the last name, and the first name. And we'll call this Customer Lookup Dataset. Okay, I also want to sort this list of customers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the dataset in the Dataset Designer. I'm going to right-click on the table adapter and select Configure. And what I want to do is I want to add an order by clause. We're going to order by the last name and then the first name. And then click Finish. Okay, so now that we have our data set up, we can design a simple form that allows us to edit these orders. So let's go ahead and click on the Window 1 XAML. And then I'm going to go to my toolbox. I'm also going to open up the document window. So go to View, Toolbox, Other Windows, Document Outline. And this will allow us to just navigate easily through our XAML visually. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to lay out my form. This grid panel is used to lay out controls on a WPF form. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to think about how I want to lay these out. So I want to put some buttons. We'll put an add and a save button down here at the bottom. And I also want to create labels on one side and our text boxes and our combo box to edit the data on the right-hand side. So let's just create a couple columns and a couple rows. Okay, so now what I can do is I can go ahead and select from the toolbox. I can drop a stack panel into this cell, and I'm going to just fit it right inside so that it takes up the space of the first row and the first column. And then I'll do the same thing with the right-hand side. So this is the second column in the first row. And then down at the bottom, I'm just going to put a couple buttons. Okay, and we'll name this button BTN Add. And just say Add. And this will add records. And what I want to do is I want to fix it to this side of the form, to the right-hand side of the form. So I can go ahead and click here, and I just want to fix it to the bottom, and I don't want it to stretch. So this is like the anchoring. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that, and so now it's just fixed to the bottom to the right-hand side. And then the same thing with another button here. Okay, and this one we'll call btn save. Okay, and here we'll just put save. Okay, so now these stack panels are here so that we can lay out the controls really easily on the form. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag some labels. We have 4 fields in our database that we want to edit. The order ID we want to display, but the customer we want to choose from a drop-down combo box, and then we have the order date and the ship date. I want to fit these labels directly into the stack panel. So instead of the width being 120, we can set the width equal to auto. And by default, that means it'll stretch into the panel. Okay, so now I've just got to put some content in here. So instead of label, we'll say order ID, and this will just be a read-only field. And the customer, the order date, and the ship date. Okay, and so now on the other side, first I'm going to drag a text box up to the top, and then I'm going to drag a combo box. Okay, and then we'll drag a couple more text boxes. And so that these controls line up a little bit better, I'm going to select them all and set their height to 28, the same as the label. Okay, and so that will stretch it out. We also need to set the width to auto as well. Okay, so that stretches everything out. Also, I'm going to make this flow a little bit nicer. With these labels, we can set what's called the horizontal content alignment, and I'm going to set that to the right. Okay, so the other thing I want to do is on this grid, because everything's now just laid up, backed up against all the borders of the window, I want to space it out just a teeny bit. So with the grid selected, I can just select it here in the document outline. Now I can set what's called the margin. And I'm just going to make this 6. So this will just space out our controls a little bit better on the form. You can also do this with all the controls as well. I'll set the margin in this case to 3. And looks like my save button's off a little bit here. I don't want to anchor it here. And we'll just... Okay, so now we've got our form designed. You'll notice I don't have any previous, next, first, and last buttons, navigation controls at the bottom. I showed how to do that in the previous videos. So for now, I'm just going to focus on add and save, because what I really want to show you is how to bind this combo box. So the way we do our data binding is in the XAML here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show the data sources, and this just makes sure that I type in the right names of the fields. So it's always helpful to take a look at what's in my data set here. Okay, so let's go ahead and move these windows out of the way so we can dig into our XAML code here. And let's start with this text box. Let's start with the binding on this guy. So we're going to bind to the text property. And the way we set up the binding is binding, and we set the path. And the path for this one is going to be the order ID. Okay, and case matters here, so make sure you type this in correctly. Now, what WPF will do if you don't set this to a field that exists is that at runtime, it's not going to do anything. It's going to just kind of ignore the error, and you'll see in your output window that the binding wasn't set right. Okay, so, but it doesn't throw an exception at runtime. Okay, so you got to notice that. All right, so the other thing with this particular text box is that I want it to be read-only, and so what I want to do is I want to set the binding mode equal to one-way, because by default text boxes are two-way binding. Okay, so set the mode attribute here to one-way. Okay, so that just makes it display instead of edit. Okay, and then is read-only, we can set that here equal to true. Okay. All right, so let's do the text box in a second. Let's go down and bind these other two text boxes really quickly. Text equal to binding path equal to, and this one's going to be the order date. Okay, and this one here is going to be the ship date. Okay, so now we've got our text boxes bound correctly. Let's take a look at our combo box. Okay, so now the combo box has got a couple different properties on here that are used to display the value we want to display. In the case, we're going to start with last name. I want to just show the last names in this list. But what we really want to bind to is the customer ID, that foreign key field. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the first property here is called display member path. So this is what we're going to display. Okay, so display member path I'm going to set to last name. Okay. Now the other thing we're going to do is we need to set the selected value path. Okay, so selected value path, okay, is going to be the customer ID. Now the only last thing to do is to set the selected value, and that's going to be a data binding to the customer ID. Okay, so selected value, here it is, okay, is going to be a binding, and the path is going to be customer ID. Okay, so now we're ready to write some code behind our form in order to load our data sets, the one we're editing and our lookup data set, and then set those data sets to the proper controls. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the code behind. So just double click on the window here. And now what I'm going to do is create some class level variables here in order to hold our data sets as well as the table adapter managers that are going to be used, or the table adapter manager at least, for the orders that we're going to use to save the data later. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a private order data. This is the data that we're going to edit here in our data set as new order, order data set. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and create the table adapter. And then the table adapter manager. Okay, and then I'm also going to create an instance of our customer lookup data table. Okay. This is going to be what we set as the list of values to that combo box. There we go. Customer data table. Okay, so the reason why I have instances to this is because we want to save it later. Okay, so first let's go ahead and create a new table adapter for the customer lookup, and since we don't actually need this to hang around, we can just create an instance right in here in the load. Okay, and now I can go ahead and use this to fill our customer lookup. Okay, so now we've got the data in there, and now we need to go ahead and fill in the orders. So me.ta order.fill me.order data orders. Okay, and then we also need to set me, the table adapter manager. We need to tell it that the order table adapter is this instance. Okay, so later when we save, it knows how to save. Okay, so now that we've got our data filled into our data sets, we can set the data context of the window equal to the ordered data table here. Okay, so now any controls that are inside this window will automatically bind to this data source, orders. Okay, so when we set up those binding paths, those paths are fields inside of this order table. Now the thing to do with the combo box, though, is we just go ahead and set what's called the item source. Okay, that we set equal to our lookup data. There we go. Okay, so now that we've got that, the item source is basically what's the list of the customers. Okay, and the customers here have last name and customer ID. So last name was that display member path, and the customer ID was the selected value path. And then the selected value is the customer ID that's inside of the orders. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a run before I actually do any saving or adding new, hooking up those buttons. Let's see if this actually works. So let's hit F5. Okay, there we go. So that loaded up. We can't navigate through, but now you can see here's the list in alphabetical order of the last names of our customer. I've got some test data in here, and you can see that our text box up at the top here is not editable. I'm typing in here and it's not allowing us to edit, but we could actually edit these. Okay, so okay, all right. So these buttons aren't hooked up yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and hook them up. So I'm just going to go back to the window here, and since we made some changes, we'll reload, and then I'll just double click on this form and we'll create our event handler here. And in order to add, the only thing I'm going to need another reference to is what's called the collection view. And I walked through a lot of this when we created our basic data entry form that worked with customer. But suffice it to say, this is what manages the currency, okay? What position we're in on our data table. Okay, so the way we get a reference to this, oops, there we go, talking and typing at the same time is difficult for me. Okay, so view equals, okay, so now what we do is we call this collection view source. There's a static method here called getDefaultView, and we just go ahead and pass it the order data.orders table. Okay, so now what we can do when we click add, what we're going to do here is at the end we're just going to say me.view.move current to last, because that's what the position will be. All right, so this is just normal stuff now. I'm just going to dim up a new row. And this is just talking to the data set to get me a new orders row. And what I'll do is I'll set this is a little trick, set the customer ID equal to 0, and then that will just make the combo box not display anything. So it's kind of nice. It'll clear it out. And so then we just say me.orderdata.orders.add orders row. Make sure that your data is valid before you call add orders row. Okay, you might have to do some validation in here, or you can add validation to your data set. Okay, so there you go. There's the add, and now let's go ahead and hook up the save. Okay, double click on that, and this is pretty easy stuff. This is just standard data set stuff. If me.orderData has changes, okay, and then we'll just say if me.the table adapter manager update all. Okay, this would take care of any child tables if we had any in our data set as well. Okay, if that's greater than 0, meaning something changed and something was updated, okay, then we'll just say message box saved. Okay, otherwise if there's an error, we'll just report it out to the screen right now. Okay, so now we have our buttons hooked up. So now there's one last thing I want to show you, and that's how to create a multi-column dropdown in our combo box. For instance, I want to display last name, comma, first name in our combo box instead. Doing this in WinForms was clunky. We'd probably just add a field called full name and concatenate last name and first name in our query or something. However, WPF makes this really, really easy. Since I'm selecting both last name and first name fields in our lookup data table, we can add what's called an item template to the combo box and specify a data template to display any content control we want to show up as the combo box items and bind them to the fields in our lookup list. So let's go back over to our form here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually remove the display member path, because what we want to do is we want to specify a template for showing multiple fields inside of that lookup table. Okay, so I'm going to just close off this tag, because now I'm just going to stuff this template inside of the combo box directly. Now the thing with the, let me just go ahead and create this items control, okay, .item template is what it is. And since this item template is going to be based on some data, we then put a data template inside. Okay, so it's called a data template. All right, so go ahead and create a data template. Okay, so now what you can stick inside of this data template is only one content control. Okay, but a content control can contain more content controls. So just keep in mind that you're just going to you can create a container and then anything inside of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a stack panel. Okay, and the orientation, okay, is equal to horizontal. Now, you could probably start getting some cool ideas going, right? Because now maybe you could even display pictures of the customers and that sort of thing. It's super easy to customize your combo boxes and list controls. Okay, so it's actually super easy to customize any control inside of WPF this way. All right, so what I'm going to do is just display, though, a very simple scenario here of just last name, comma, first name. Okay, that's a typical data scenario here. I'm not getting too fancy with the UI because we're talking about data. Okay, so I'm just going to name this text block. And all a text block does really is just display text. So here we go. And this text, though, is going to be binding, right, to the field inside of the lookup table. Okay, so before we were binding to the table we're editing, and now we're binding to the table that we're displaying that data from in the lookup. All right, so now I'm just going to add another text block. And this one will be easy. I'll make this width equal to 5 because this is just going to be a comma. It's not data bound. Okay, and then finally we'll go ahead and do the first name. Okay, and then text equals binding. Okay. Okay, there we go. So now we've got this data template for our item template of each of the items inside of this combo box will display in last name, comma, first name. Okay, so let's give this a run and make sure that our buttons also work. Okay, there you go. So now when we drop these down, you can see last name, comma, first name for all of our customers in this list. Very cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a new record. You can see I've got auto incrementing set on the data set by default. Now, since it's 0, it's not displaying anything in this combo box, which is really nice because it can't find anything in it that matches. Okay, so it's not going to display the first one. It's going to display nothing. Okay, so order date, we can go ahead and set the date to like maybe 6/1/2008. And the ship date 6/2. We're speedy shippers. And now I can go ahead and click save, and we are saved. Okay, and you will know that we're saved because there's the new order ID. So that's how easy it is to hook up data binding on a lookup list in a combo box, and as well as customizing exactly how the item template looks of that combo box. Cool. So I'd like to thank you for your time. If you'd like to check out more videos, you can check MSDN Developer Centers, or for more information on WPF and WinForms, check out windowsclient.net. Thanks again.